All right, so chapter 13, Japan, Korea, Vietnam. Like we talked about last chapter also in terms of note-taking strategies. This again would be a good one. For those of you that work better with color or with symbols or whatever, continue to add that to your notes. So again, you're going to see here some characterizations of what we're talking about. We have our Chinese dragon, we have our Japanese samurai in cartoon form, because some people like that better. And most importantly, we have our statue of the Buddha, which, as your reading quiz talked about, is going to be the vehicle for all of this cultural diffusion. This is not cultural diffusion through conquest. This is, we're going to introduce you to one aspect of our culture, and that one aspect is going to make you want other parts of it. It's like if you give a mouse a cookie. Exactly. All right, so some overarching themes as we begin this chapter. One, again, Buddhism. Buddhism is what's going to cause relationships to form between China and Japan, between China and Korea, between China and Vietnam. It will be this missionary outreach to spread this religion. Now, we don't often think of Buddhism as a missionary religion. I'm guessing you've never had somebody come and knock on your door wearing Buddhist robes and say, "Can I tell you about the Four Noble Truths?" Has that happened to anybody? I'm assuming not. Did you know we have a Buddhist temple?
Yes,
by the Wing Factory?
Yeah. Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, it looks kind of Buddhist. You'll see them walking around the mall every once in a while, driving a car. Sometimes they'll be wearing that stereotypical orange, sash, robe, the shaved head. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're shopping, which seems a little bit weird for Buddhists, but that's okay. But in 21st century society, we don't typically associate Buddhism with missionaries. We typically associate that with which religions? Christianity and Islam. But at this time in history, Buddhism is very much a missionary faith. It is trying to spread this knowledge of, removing yourself from material possessions and this much more spiritual way of life. And because it's coming out of China, it's also bringing with it other characteristics from Chinese culture. And so one of the other things that we're going to find is that as all of this interaction is taking place, you are not going to see anybody using the Xerox machine. They're not going to copy all of China and hand it off to the next country. Instead, what you're going to find is more like a grocery store mentality. I'm going to take this, I'm going to take this, I'm going to skip that aisle completely, I'm going to take this, this, and this, but I don't want that. So kind of a buffet mentality of cultural diffusion. And so because of that, it creates connections not just with China, but with the place where Buddhism originates, which is India. But time and time again, as this culture comes to a new place, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, time and time again, the people there are going to have to ask themselves one question. How much do I really want to be like China? Is this the kind of thing that I'm going to embrace with open arms? Is this the kind of thing where I don't know what I'm getting myself into and this is going to go horribly, horribly, horribly wrong like that time I dyed my hair? Not me, just, theoretically. Is this something that seems scary at first but will actually be beneficial in the long run? How much do we really need this? And how much do we really want it? And you're going to see a wide variety of responses. Some of these places will embrace it wholeheartedly from the get-go. Some will be skeptical. Some will never warm up to it and will only take some of these things grudgingly. And so that's one of the things that we want to pay attention to. And then the last thing that we notice is because they all do adopt some characteristics of Chinese culture over and above Buddhism, it does create a cultural link. It doesn't mean they're exactly the same, Not every Asian nation is exactly like the others. They don't all speak the same language. They don't all look alike. They don't all dress alike. They don't all talk alike. They don't all eat the same food. I know those are sometimes the stereotypes, but it's not true. But with that said, there are some commonalities that do come as a result of all of this cultural exchange. Stephen? To the best of my knowledge, no. But this is definitely one of those areas where I am by no means an expert. All right, are we good here? Yes, yes, yes? Okay. Hearing no complaints. All right, so let's start with Japan. Japan is going to be one of those places that's a little bit skeptical at first, because Japan has a civilization that they developed all on their own. They have their own religion, they have their own form of government, they have their own language. They feel like they're doing pretty well. They are especially proud of their religion, which is Shinto. Good. You guys learned about Shinto last year, right? Okay. A little bit, kind of. One or two things here or there. What are some things that they believe in? Nick?
Animism.
Animism. Belief in natural spirits. What else? Ancestor worship. What else? Anybody remember what they call those natural spirits? No. Kami. K-A-M-I. Very good. That's pretty close. Kami. Not like Russians, but K-A-M-I. Natural spirits. And that's also how they referred to their ancestors, family members that had passed on. Now, in most other faiths, when people die, where do they go? All right, they go up or they go down or they go someplace else, right? When people die, their soul, their spirit typically goes elsewhere. Up, down, out, but gone in any case. In Shinto, the kami actually stay. And they remain here in the spiritual world of Earth. And the reason that they remain is because in the Shinto faith, Earth is actually heaven. There is no better place to go. This is paradise. This is perfection. Japan especially. And so one of the things that you see in the Shinto faith is this archway, which is called a torii. And that archway represents the merging, the fusion of the physical and the spiritual world. So you could walk beneath this arch and have metaphorically crossed over, but guess what? You're still on Earth. Right. And so this religion shapes their entire worldview. And so as a result, because they are already living in heaven, how do they treat the environment? With respect. And that seems to be a hallmark of most Eastern religions, but it's especially true in Shinto. There is absolute respect for the earth. Because you wouldn't want to mess up heaven. There's the belief that these kami can actually intercede in the daily lives of people. That your ancestors literally are watching over you because they're right there, like just back behind your shoulder, watching you day and night, while you sleep, while you're at work, while you're at play. And that they can intercede and save you on your behalf, which is why you pray to them sometimes. In fact, when the Mongol army is rampaging across Asia, they get the great idea that they should go and invade Japan next. And so the Mongol horde is placed on a fleet of ships, and they're sailing across the Sea of Japan. And they're going to land, and they're going to annihilate Japan. And you know what happens? They get destroyed by a tsunami. A divine wind blows a giant tidal wave into the Mongol fleet and wrecks them. And they believe that that divine wind was brought by their spirits, which is how you get the word kami-kaze. Kami being spirits, divine, a divine wind that protected their homeland from this invading force. Yes, sir.
Didn't the Mongols try to invade again?
I don't remember if there was a repeat effort. There might have been. You could be right. No, really? Okay. You might be right. Like I said, this is not one of my areas of expertise. Stephen? Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And ancestor worship is a fairly common practice in a lot of religions around the world because it helps make sense of death. It answers the question, where do we go when we die? Well, you stay here and you watch out for the people that you love. It makes sense. But by the time we get to 646, and we don't ask you to memorize years very often, but the Taika reforms are a benchmark that you want to know in Asian history. The Taika reforms are the moment when Japan decides, we kind of like what China has to offer. China's kind of impressive. China in their classical age was obviously amazing. And now they're bouncing back and they're becoming amazing again. And we want that. We want their wealth. We want their prosperity. We want their goods. China's got cool stuff. We want their level of education and innovation and invention. We want all that. So how do we become like them? It's like that little sibling that constantly emulates an older brother or sister. They want to dress like them. They want to have the same hobbies. They want to play the same sports. They want to eat the same foods. They want to be the same thing when they grow up. China has this moment of sibling idol worship. We want to be like China, exactly like China. Everything like China. China's the best. They get those big foam fingers. China's number one. It's adorable. And so here is the short list of what they adopt. They bring in the Confucian teachings that are the hallmark of China's education system. And they say, all right, Japanese students, you're going to learn the Analects. You are going to memorize the teachings of this wise Chinese man. Learn what he says. Smart guy. Do what he does. Trina, what was your question?
But after this, does it not work out?
Right.
And then that's amazing.
Right. Right. We're going to spoil the ending here and tell you none of this actually works. But for a time, it's a complete makeover. So, Confucian education, which means you then have to create a scholar class. You need that scholar bureaucrat if this system is going to work. Because all these people that you have now taught the teachings of Confucius to need a job where they can put that work into practice. So you now have to create a class in the social hierarchy and in the government where these people can go. Well, if you're going to learn the teachings of Confucius, I mean, you better learn Mandarin, because that's how it's written. So they're now going to import an alphabet and a written language that at the time in no way resembles Japanese. So imagine being here in the United States, but you are going to take your classes in Greek. Because we admire the Greeks. Our civilization is based on Greece. Yeah, they're broke, but that's okay. Everybody makes mistakes. So all of your classes in school, would be in Greek. Your textbooks would be in Greek. You would write in Greek. You would speak in Greek. But you're going to go home and not speak Greek. Because your family's like, what are you talking about? Is that going to make life a little tricky? Yeah. With Latin? Yeah. Yep. Well, right. We're going to start to treat the Japanese rulers like they're Chinese. So the same practices, the same rituals, the same signs of respect, one of them being the kowtow. You guys know what the kowtow is? It's not just a deep bow, it's where you get down on your knees and prostrate yourself on the ground and touch your forehead to the floor as a sign of ultimate respect. I'm getting myself as low as I possibly can in your magnificent presence. I'm basically crawling on the ground to show you my respect. Japanese king's like, yes, sir. Sign me up for that. All you people, down on the ground right now. And so that Japanese monarch quickly becomes a divine emperor who buys into the concept of the Son of Heaven, which actually works in Japan because they have gods. They have all these spirits. And so in Japan it actually makes sense. And that's going to be one of the few things that remain when all these other reforms are dead and gone, is that the Japanese emperor will continue to be viewed as the Son of God. Yes, sir? I honestly don't remember. I feel like they do, but I could be wrong. But this proved to be tricky during World War II, when the United States insists on a complete and total surrender by Japan during the war in the Pacific. And one of our criteria was that the Japanese emperor must step down and remove himself from power and give up the title of emperor. Why would that be tricky? Right. He's like a god. Right. So we can stop fighting, we'll stop killing you, but you have to get rid of your god first. How do you think that's going to go over? Yeah, more killing, right. And that's why there is not a quick ceasefire and peace in the Pacific, and consequently 2 atomic bombs get dropped. But we'll talk about that later. All right, creation, professional bureaucracy. Again, you need a scholar class to have some place to go and something to work on. And Buddhism. Now, as we've seen in other societies, when you bring in a new religion, who is typically the group that adopts a new religion first? No. The upper class. Now, in India, obviously the reverse is true. In India, nobody at the top ever adopts a new religion, because why would you? Because you're so close. But in most other places, when a new religion is introduced, who are the people that have the wealth and the opportunity and the free time to learn about a new religion? The elites. Who are the people that are typically so secure in their earthly existence that they're like, yeah, I'm willing to dabble a little bit? The elites. And so this is what we find when Buddhism shows up in Japan, and the same thing's going to hold true in Korea. The people at the top are the people that are most willing to experiment with a new faith. Because even if that faith doesn't work out, their earthly life is still awesome. For the lower classes, though, again, other than in India, why would you be reluctant to change your faith? Hey, you're not as secure, Stephen. Tradition. Anybody have Fiddler on the Roof play in their head when somebody says that word? Happens to me all the time. Eileen, what were you going to say? Yeah. Their life on earth sucks. For peasants in most societies, their life on earth sucks. And the only thing keeping them going is their faith that the next life will be better. That's why even in India, you saw comparatively few lower caste Hindus abandon Hinduism. Because their argument is, our life is pretty bad now, but what happens if our faith is right and we abandon it for one that seems easier? What's going to happen to us then? What would happen if you were a Hindu and you abandoned your faith and it turned out that Hinduism was the right one?
Reincarnated as a tree.
Right, you're reincarnated as like dog poop. I mean, you are going to start at the very bottom and have to climb your way all the way back up again just to get to peasant. And then you're a peasant for a long time because you know God's pissed at you. And so this is what you find in most cultures around the world, is conversion is a very slow process for people at the bottom. Because as bad as your life is right now, the one thing that's gotten you through is your faith. Your belief that God had a purpose for this life, and it sucks for a very good reason that maybe you don't understand, but that God does, regardless of which God that is. What about what? Hope? Yeah, hope and faith. I mean, those are the things that get peasants through. What's that? Well, and that's why you will see some people convert, especially people that did not have strong ties to their existing faith, or that felt like in their existing faith God had abandoned them. And so you will see those that are willing to turn to a new faith, or maybe their God will like me more. But this is why you often see, especially in the lower classes, this conflict. They want to believe in this new religion, especially if this new religion will make their life better. But at the same time, they are absolutely terrified because earthly life already sucks. Do I really want to jeopardize my afterlife? You know, imagine you're gambling and you've lost everything you own. You are wiped out. And then the dealer says, look, I'll offer you one more. Your house and your car and your family, if you lose. If you win, I'll give you everything back that you've lost. Are you going to take that bet?
Yeah.
You're like, I hate my family. My house is crappy.
My car's broken.
I don't even have a flat screen TV in my room. It's ridiculous. Most people are not going to risk that much more than they've already lost. And so even if you're a peasant, even if you're poor, even if you're living in a shanty with a dirt floor, risking eternity is even more serious. And so you are going to see very, very slow conversion. And oftentimes you're going to see a blending of religions. And what do we call that? Syncretism. Like, well, I'm going to try to keep my old religion happy, so I'm going to keep this, this, and this, but I'm going to sneak a peek at this new one, and maybe I might, just on one day a year, I'll do one of their prayers. That way, just in case they're right, I'm kind of in their God's good graces, but just in case my old religion is right, I'm still mostly in the same place. You're going to see that kind of strategy a lot. All right, we good here? Yes, ma'am. Because for the elites, it was the prospect of what adopting that religion could also bring. All of the economic wealth, all of the material wealth, all of the things that could make this life on earth even more awesome than it already was for them. It was greed more than anything else. So, yes, sir? No. Good question. When the Buddhist monasteries are created in Japan, they're not taxed right away either. And so Japan's going to get to learn that problem the hard way as well. It does repeat itself. It's weird. All right. So we already ruined the ending for you. The Taika reforms fail by the mid-8th century, which means what years? Mid-8th century means what in years? 700s. So you get maybe 100 years out of the Taika reforms. And then Japan finds itself thinking, and this didn't work. We tried, but this didn't work. Because the Japanese upper-class families, the aristocrats, the nobles, that had been in power for hundreds of years, are finding that we don't like this. They especially didn't like this whole new Buddhist group. That again, because of the land that they acquired and the fact that they're not taxed, gives them incredible political power. So, And this is where a diagram may help you, or even just a note in your margin. Who are the different political groups that have power right now in Japan? We have aristocrats, Buddhist monks, and who was already there? The emperor. So we have a three-way struggle for power at the moment. Is that a good thing? Is that going to encourage a functional, happy government? No. And so the Japanese aristocrats and the Buddhists, they don't want an absolute emperor. And they're fighting this tooth and nail. They are doing everything they possibly can to take power back from the emperor. And the emperor is over here trying to make every single possible decision that he can and take as much power as possible. And so the emperor decides, and this is where this turns into a bit of a soap opera. This is like daytime TV now. You've got the emperor, you got the aristocrats, you got the Buddhists. And they're all making plans with each other, and they're all trying to backstab the other one so they can each get as much as they want. And so the emperor says, look, I'm fighting two people at once here. I'm fighting the aristocrats and I'm fighting the Buddhists. I can't win this by myself. Everybody's against me. What do I need? If everybody's against me, what do I need? I need allies. I need somebody on my side. I need somebody who's going to say, yeah, you're right, you should have more power. So I got to make one of these two groups of people happy with me. Well, who should I stab in the back? The Buddhists. Why? Because they don't belong here. They're foreigners. It's a foreign religion. So, makes an alliance with the aristocrats, puts them back into a position of power, gives up some of his authority to them. So imagine this on like a sliding scale. The emperor was trying to be up here with the aristocrats and the Buddhists down here. Now the emperor is bringing himself down some and bringing up the aristocrats and trying to keep the Buddhists way, way down here. So are the aristocrats happy? Yeah, more or less. Emperor happy? Yeah, not bad. Buddhists happy? No! So we're going to get to that. But in the meantime, we're also going to get rid of what we call the civil service exam in Japan. This merit system of advancement. So if you get rid of a merit system, if you get rid of a system that's based on ability and skills, how are you going to decide who gets positions? If it's not based on ability and skills and knowledge, what is it based on? Family connections, birth, who your parents are. So in other words, we're pretty much undoing every single part of the Taika reforms. Had a 100-year run, it's just not working. But now we've got this conflict for power between the emperor and the aristocrats and the Buddhists. And the Buddhists actually tried, they at one point, and you'll read this in your textbook, they came up with a plan at one point to try to get a Buddhist monk married to a woman in the imperial family so that maybe a Buddhist could become emperor of Japan, and then like the Buddhists would have all the power and it would be wonderful. That didn't quite work. But I mean, it really is like a soap opera. And so when you read this part of your book, if you can picture it like that, like just, come up with a character for each group, and then just have like the cheesy dialogue and the ridiculous costumes and the bad set lighting, like it's like a soap opera. Either that or like Survivor, if that one works better for you. All right, so we good here? So now we got to see how the story ends. And so what we see happening in Japan now is we've got this weird hybridization of Chinese culture and Japanese culture. And as time goes on, all that we really accomplish is to move the elites, the upper class, much, much further above everybody else in society. The wealthy become super wealthy, and the poor remain very, very poor. And so now for the super wealthy, again, this becomes a game. Who can get power from who? Who can owe a favor to somebody else? How much fun can I have? And what kind of things can I buy? And can I get more Chinese stuff, or should I have more Japanese stuff? And what kind of makeup should I wear? And what kind of clothes should I wear? Should I wear Chinese clothes or Japanese clothes? I don't know. I can't figure out what's in style right now. There's so much confusion going on. Meanwhile, the peasants are like, dude, I'd like some food. I would like to eat. A little bread would make me happy. You know what? I'll take moldy bread. That's okay too. I'll eat grass at this point. That's how hungry I am. But in the world of the elites, life has gotten incredibly, incredibly shallow and superficial. In the Japanese courts at this time, it's all about how you look, what you wear, and how much wealth you have. People show off their wealth in extravagant and gaudy ways. Ridiculously expensive clothes and jewelry and shoes. Hairstyles in odd fashions just to draw attention. People recite poetry to each other. And they all think that they're very deep and profound and thinking about such high-minded things. And we would look at them and be like, seriously? You're ridiculous. You're walking around in a costume reciting lines. Nobody takes you seriously. You're an idiot. But this is what the Japanese court had turned into. This contest for power had accelerated to the point where everybody is competing all of the time. Women in the elite level would have just hordes of men following after them, reciting poetry about how beautiful they are and how much like the moon you are, so distant but so beautiful. I love you so much. And then like 52 other guys would be coming by like, no, I do. No, I do. It's ridiculous. Although the upside for the women on this one is that life actually isn't that bad for a little while. Like all of this focus on beauty really kind of elevates the status of women in Japanese upper society. Like women become great contributors to poetry and art and music. And because all these guys are following after them, the women are able to exert considerable influence. Like, you know, if you really loved me, you would do this. You would fire this guy, because I don't like him. If you really loved me, you would appoint my brother as the next, general of whatever. We also see in Japan that because the lower class is struggling so much, that women are actually allowed to engage in some economic activity, to help keep a shop open, to help out in the fields, to engage in a little bit of trade, things like that. But one of the sad things that all of this contact with China takes away from Japanese women is that in earlier Japanese culture, we're going to have a little Mulan moment. No, we're not going to watch the movie. Just make the connection. In early Japanese culture, young girls and young boys were both trained in, the martial arts. And not martial arts like karate and kung fu and all that, but martial arts in terms of military training. So they would be trained to ride horses. They would be trained to shoot a bow and arrow. They would be trained to hunt. But does China encourage that sort of thing with women at all? No. And so because of this close relationship with China, this is going to be one of those things that will be taken away from Japanese women. Yes, Trina? Chinese. But just kind of imagine that picture of a warrior woman. For a while in Japan, that was actually normal. You would have samurai women. Not all the time, not every woman, but it was possible. But as that relationship with China deepens, that will go away. Marriage will become much more male dominant. Fathers will pass wealth to sons now. Women will be cut out of a lot of the inheritance. Yeah. Now, here's a fun question as you guys are finishing up your notes. Why would China be so interested in spreading their culture to other places? So, good. A lot of this is economic. If China can create, close trading partners by making other areas a whole lot like them, that's a guaranteed market for your stuff. That's guaranteed income. If you can make other people thirsty and you have a whole bunch of water, you're going to make money. If you can make other people want to be like you, they're going to buy your stuff. If you could make your younger sibling want to be exactly like you, you could sell them all your old clothes and make a fortune. Please don't go do that. Any other reasons why China might want to make other people like them? Nick?
They believe that that's around, they want to spread their stuff to other people, like almost every civilization is out of them.
Good. A lot of this is ideological. China is convinced of their own superiority. China is convinced that they're better than everybody else, so why wouldn't everybody else want to be like them? We're doing Japan a favor by exposing them to our culture. They didn't know they wanted to be like us. Now we're showing them what they should be like. In the end, they're going to thank us for this. Hannah? Not really. And that's one of the other interesting things with China is they don't really seem to have this European need to take people over and control them. In this case, it was more cultural control. If we can make you more like us, you're pretty much going to do what we want you to do anyway. At that point, there's no need for soldiers and armies and death and things like that.
Are they paying tribute?
Japan?
Yeah.
For a little while, yeah. Serena?
Does this also help China, like, with that, like, it's not getting big stuff?
That's a good idea. Japan itself was probably not a huge threat to come in and take them over. But I think some of this probably was an attempt to secure their borders a little bit and keep them safer from their neighbors. You're right. It's a good point. Nick?
So you said that they would have political intrigue,
Mhm.
that it would sometimes look down to the military. Does this have a significant impact on the performance of Japanese militarily?
In a moment, yes. Because in a moment what we're going to find is that the country nobles, the people that actually own all the land where the farming takes place, and who also control all the samurai, are going to get really fed up with all this. So it's not going to have an impact on the military the way that you were probably thinking, where it was going to severely weaken them. Instead, it's going to get them all fired up. And so what we eventually end up with is what we were just alluding to, a fourth group now competing for political power. So we still have the aristocrats, the elites in the city, And so before you start frantically copying, let's just go back and introduce the characters. So we've got the urban elite, the people, the families in the capital that have been there for hundreds of years, have always had high positions in society and the government. And then we have the Buddhists that control some land because of their monasteries, which again are not taxed. And because of the spiritual component, have a great following amongst the common people. Well, some of them at least. And then if we skip down to the bottom for a moment, we still have the emperor. And the emperor is the guy that would still love to have total power, but he's realizing how hard that's going to be to accomplish. And then this is our fourth group. And the Japanese called their, what we would consider feudal nobles. They called them the bushi. And those are the guys that are out in the countryside, that actually control hundreds of acres of farmland, and therefore the peasants that live on that land. And it means they control the food supply. And much like in Europe, where feudal lords would frequently go to war with each other and try to conquer, their next door neighbor, the same thing would be happening in Japan with these bushi. Neighboring warlords might try to invade and take over the other one. And so to protect themselves, they had to develop professional soldiers. And who are the professional soldiers in Japan? The samurai. So in this story, with these four groups of people vying for power, who is the only group that has any military might? The bushi. Now, this again takes a second to wrap your head around, because you need to realize the emperor does not have his own army. There is no Japanese army that he controls. The aristocrats do not have their own soldiers. And obviously the Buddhists don't. So in this situation, if things ever get violent, who's got the obvious advantage? The bushi. Because they have the only fighting force in all of Japan. And the only thing that saved everybody else so far is that the bushi don't like each other either. Each of these feudal warlords is just as worried about all the other feudal warlords as they are about anybody else. But as the government gets more unstable, and this is what we're going to run through what each of these groups do to try to seize more power. The aristocrats try to buy up land, which would give them control of what? Food and people. If you control food and people, does that give you more power? Absolutely. So they're trying to accumulate wealth and people and power. And look at what the Buddhists are doing. The same thing. Now, how do Buddhists get more land? Yeah, people give it to them. Old man living near a Buddhist monastery, he's on his deathbed. He's like, man, I never liked my kids very much. They're all whiny and bratty. But you know who I do like? I love those Buddhists. They were always so nice to me, so respectful, so polite. So when I die, I'm going to give my home and my land to those nice Buddhists. What's the emperor trying to do? He's trying to do whatever he can. The emperor is still trying to claim that he is a divine emperor, that the gods themselves have chosen him. And do you really want to argue with the gods? Apparently people do. Because they're not buying the whole divine emperor thing anymore. Alia?
Since they're Buddhist, don't they not believe in God?
Very good. And so that's part of the issue that the Buddhists are having. They're like, we really don't recognize your gods, so this whole divine emperor thing, not really working for us. And the aristocrats are like, all right, we still may be holding on to Shinto, but we don't like you, so we're just not going to acknowledge that the gods actually picked you. We think the gods are just waiting for you to get the boot and get out of here. So, and many of them have adopted Buddhism, so again, for them, this divine emperor thing, they're not buying it. But then you look at the Bushi, this group that up until now has been relatively quiet in this whole soap opera drama. So here it's like the surprise character that shows up halfway through the season. So they're going to increase their already considerable land holdings. And because they control most of the production in the countryside, what do they control? Food production. So if they choose to, when harvest time comes and all these crops are harvested, what can they do?
They can keep it all for themselves.
Right, they can sit on it and not send it into the cities like they would usually do and send it to market. That gives them incredible power. And then they turn their mansions, they turn their homes in the countryside into fortresses. They turn them into castles that can be defended. In other words, they make their kingdoms totally self-sufficient. They can grow their own food, they have their own labor source, they have their own military, and now they have a fortress that cannot be easily taken. And so from there, they're simply going to continue to add to their armies of samurai. And so as government starts to break down more and more, you start to have riots in the cities, especially when there's a shortage of food. And if there's a riot in the city, does the emperor have any way of putting that down? No, because does the emperor have any military? No. Can the aristocrats stop a riot? Can the Buddhists stop a riot? No. So here's the kicker. The emperor actually has to beg the Bushi to borrow the samurai, which he'll have to pay for, to come in and act as his police for the short term and get society back under control. So the Bushi are just going to get wealthier and wealthier and have more and more influence. Because if they really want to mess with the emperor, when the emperor calls up and says, look, we got a riot, the peasants are complaining, there's a revolt in the city, they're burning buildings, I need help, you got to send me the samurai. What can the Bushi say? No, I'm sorry, I'm busy today. I can't help you. So now if you're the emperor and you're desperate, what do you have to do? All right, I'll pay you. I'll pay you 3 times what we normally pay you. Huh? You know what? My schedule just opened up. I'll send those samurai right over. Isn't that a great position to be in if you're the Bushi? Yeah. Trina?
Why did the emperor create samurai?
It's an excellent question. You can't create samurai. The samurai come from a particular social class. The samurai are pretty much raised from childhood to be these warriors. They dedicate their entire life to studying the code of Bushido. This isn't like a weekend warrior type thing. Like I'm a shopkeeper, but on the weekends I take out my samurai sword and swing it around for a while. Like this is a lifelong dedication to a lifestyle. Now, you can raise an army of peasants and give them all swords and say, here, go fight. Any of you take like karate or taekwondo or something when you were little? Do like the tiger den? Any of you guys do that? There's one near my house. I walk by it all the time. They got the, the huge floor-to-ceiling windows, and I walk in, I see like the little 6-year-olds, and they're like kicking and stuff. Like, you guys are adorable. Would they stand any chance against like a 30-year-old black belt? No. It would be sad. It would be very sad. And that's the issue that the emperor has. I mean, these samurai have been studying the art of warfare for decades. And so if the emperor just hands out swords and pitchforks to a whole bunch of peasants and says, here, go storm the castle, how is that going to go? Not well. Not well at all. And that's only going to make him weaker, because does anybody follow a leader that consistently loses? No. Paul?
Why don't the Bushi just like say, no, we don't want to do this, and then let them close on it?
Because the Bushi are still fighting each other. And so if I decide to be the jerk that hangs up on the emperor when he calls for my help, what am I risking? He calls my rival and says, hey, I'll pay you for your samurai. And so you still have this moment here where even though the Bushi are in the best position as a group, they don't like each other. And so we're not at the point yet where they are unified. Now, if they ever get unified, what's going to happen?
Inconsequential cataclysmic destruction.
Pretty much, right. I mean, they will be able to take over Japan and do whatever they want. But at the moment, they're not unified, and that's the only thing keeping Japan from, as you said, just watching it all fall apart. Hannah?
Why don't the samurai like go about emperors?
You guys remember we talked about feudalism in Western Europe? All right, who do the knights owe their allegiance to? The nobles. You swear an oath of allegiance, and it's the same thing with the samurai. They swear an oath of allegiance to the Bushi. And so at that point, you're not going to risk your lord's allegiance and favor to go run off and save an emperor that frankly isn't doing his job very well anyway. Nick?
How different were the samurai from European knights?
Very similar, actually. And in your textbook, in one of the pages that you love to skip, which is one of the big yellow boxes that take up half the page, there is actually a great short article that does exactly that. Actually, I think it's a green box that compares European feudalism to Japanese feudalism. And there's a lot of really good similarities. And I would honestly not be at all surprised if there happened to be a compare-contrast question on the quiz at some point comparing Japanese feudalism with European feudalism. Hint, hint.
Why didn't one of the Bushi become the more superior Bushi?
Because then what if all the other Bushi united and... Right. It still would be cool. Right, and so again, when you've got this many people fighting for power, it's really hard for one person to make a really big, dramatic move, because it might just be enough to rally everybody else against them. And so again, all we're seeing right now is Japan sinking further and further into chaos. Oh yeah, chaos is fun. It's good times. And so what we end up with at the close of our story is actually exactly what you guys just predicted. Is that at some point we are going to have a military government. The Bushi will realize their power, and they will truly become the rulers of Japan. And we're actually going to have a name change if you skip to the bottom for a moment. They are no longer going to be called Bushi by the time we get to this period at the end of the post-classical era, where Japan turns into a military government. They're going to now refer to themselves as daimyo. And so they will create a military government, and that government is called the Bakufu, which is short-lived because then we're going to have the creation of the shogunate. So we will go from a military government where all of the daimyo are kind of ruling jointly to the shogunate, where there will be a single powerful daimyo who will assume the title of shogun. And he will rule because he has the most military power. And he will keep the emperor as his puppet. And he will trot out the emperor every once in a while, and he'll say this, and the emperor will say, okay. And the emperor will speak to the people. But the shogun will be the one that truly rules Japan.
So the emperor is a public figurehead and nothing more?
Yep.
But he doesn't have to worry about life
Oh, he has to worry about his life.
I mean, at least the people that he...
Well, no, he has to worry because he is the public figurehead.
I mean,
If the people are unhappy, they're going to blame the emperor. And if he upsets the shogun, he's going to die. So the emperor is actually in a pretty awful spot, all things considered, because he's going to be blamed for all the decisions that he's forced to make. He has zero control and total accountability. What's that? But he does, right. I mean, he still has the nameplate on the door that says emperor, which by itself is kind of cool. But it's probably a far more terrifying position than it usually is. Right. I mean, you're still pretty wealthy, You get nice clothes, you live in a cool house. So, I mean, you do have those comforts at least to balance it out.
I hope everything works well.
Right. Emily? It's similar, yeah. Except here, everybody pretty much knows the Shogun has all the power. It's not quite as much of a secret. Nick?
Is it in any way similar to the British monarchy after the Magna Carta?
No, because even after the Magna Carta, the British monarchy still has some power. Here, the emperor truly is a puppet. And so what we find fairly quickly is that, again, the emperor becomes a figurehead. So, out of the 4 groups fighting for power, we've now gotten rid of 1. The emperor is gone. The Bushi, who are now the daimyo, get rid of the aristocracy because they can't protect themselves, because they have no army, and the samurai just roll right over them. So now we're down to 2 groups. The daimyo, and who's left? The Buddhists. But now the Buddhists are pretty much no threat either, because they obviously have no military power. And so this is how we end up with this period of the Japanese shogunate, where the daimyo and the samurai rule Japan with military power.
Until the guns show up.
Until the guns show up. Now, how many of you thought that this was fairly complicated and convoluted and you're a little confused, especially by all the different words? Okay, yeah. This is why you have to read this chapter. Because there is so much going on here, and it all seems to be happening so quickly. Even though obviously it's spread out over hundreds of years, it's condensed to 20 pages in your textbook. The things that take place in Korea and Vietnam happen just as quickly on paper. And so again, I would strongly encourage you to take some time over the break and make sure that you dig into chapter 13. But for now, I hope this helped.